Last year, on Christmas Eve, I got fired. I had spent the last 6 years of my career working as a CTO, and I never experienced failure like this. Getting fired sucks. Makes you feel betrayed, alone, incompetent. For me, it was terrifying. I'd gone from having a comfy job and a high-status position to having nothing. I was worried about being able to find a new job because I had been an engineering manager for a few years, and my coding skills had gotten rusty. And I wondered if I was even cut out to be a CTO. Well, it was the holidays, and I knew hiring was slow, but I started applying to jobs anyway, just shotgunning my resume, desperate. And meanwhile, I had nothing to work on and wanted something to feel good about, so I started working on a little side project. At the beginning of January, I flew to Chicago to be with close friends and family. It was freezing cold, and I was in a dark place. I was completely preoccupied with trying to figure out what to do with my life. I thought about all the options. Thought about just getting an easy remote job and traveling the world. Thought about trying to cash in and move to San Francisco and get a lucrative job. I even considered a career change and looked into data science courses. Well, one night, I went out with a friend of mine to talk about my situation and get his advice. And after talking for a while, he asked me the question. He said, "Avi, what would you do if you didn't need to worry about money?" My answer came to me instantly. If I didn't need to worry about money, I would go build my own thing, build my own product, and work for myself. And in fact, this had always been my dream, lurking in the back of my mind behind fears of failure and not having money. But in this moment, I felt I could do it. That if I got started now and didn't quit, eventually, I could succeed. And so I did. In the next 4 months, I built my own software product and grew it to the point where it covered my bills and I could go full time on it. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of how I did it. I'm Avi Noda, and I built poll reminders. Like, so, sorry, my notes aren't on here. Let's switch it. So, when I figured out what I was going to do with my life, the first thing I had to do was figure out how I was going to pay my bills. I had no income, and I really liked buying the organic avocados at the grocery store, and I needed some way to cover everything. And I also knew that I wanted to give myself the best chance to succeed, and in order to do that, I had to give myself a long runway. I didn't want to be stressed about money or worried about paying rent. And so I actually thought about getting a full-time job, but decided against it. And the thing was, I wanted to be able to cover my bills, but I didn't want to be too comfortable. I wanted to be on my toes and pressured to actually come up with an idea that generated money. So instead, I applied to some consulting agencies and was able to find some contract work right away. If you want to do your own thing, build your own product, start a business, my recommendation is to not quit your job. I think that burning your boats does have some advantages, but in the end, it creates a lot of pressure and constraints and limits your chance for success. So remember that side project I told you about I started working on after I got fired? That was poll reminders, and I'll tell you a little bit about the backstory. So at the job I got fired from, I was in charge of managing a distributed team, and we had a code review process that's probably similar to yours. We would open up pull requests on GitHub, assign reviewers, and share them in Slack to notify the team. Raise your hand if this sounds similar to your code review process. OK. So you guys probably know what I'm talking about, but we would have this problem where people would share their pull requests in Slack, and then it would just be crickets. And you would think, oh, people are probably out for lunch, busy in a meeting, and so you'd go out for lunch, get some bibimbap or whatever, and when you came back, you'd still wouldn't have a code review. And so this was our problem. Code reviews would take anywhere from days to even weeks to complete. And so a feature that took someone 1 day to build could take weeks to actually release to customers because of how slow the code review process was. And so from that point on, I started spending a lot of my own time checking up on pull requests and following up with people who needed to take action. I hated spending time this way. This is kind of what it was like. And it wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fun. I'm supposed to be managing the team. And so I looked into how I could possibly automate this. So had GitHub Actions existed back then, I would have probably tried that first, but at the time it didn't. So one thing I tried was Zapier. So I spent a few hours one day setting up some zaps, and in the end, my solution cost almost $100 a month to run, and all it would do is post new pull requests to Slack. If you're trying to come up with an idea for something to build, my advice is to pick a problem you personally have. I think that the best ideas come from scratching your own itch, because when you do that, you're intimately familiar with the problem you're trying to solve, and also who you're trying to solve it for. So I was tinkering with the side project pull reminders, and at this point I was doing some contract work. I was able to buy those organic avocados, and I wasn't sure if I should continue with pull reminders, because I wasn't sure if it was something that anyone would actually pay for or want to use. And the thing is, like maybe a lot of you, I've had a lot of side projects in the past, and pretty much everything has turned out to be something no one wants to use and no one cares about. And so I didn't want pull reminders to suffer that same fate. I wanted to build something people wanted. And so I did a couple of things. One thing I did was go on Google and just search for GitHub pull request reminder. And a bunch of open source projects came up. I remember having mixed feelings about this. On one hand, I was like, yay, I'm not the only crazy person with this idea. But I was also worried because there were already these free options, and I wasn't sure if anyone would pay for mine or even sign up for it. So I did a little more research into these, and I found two things. One was that they weren't very customizable. Typically, you can control things like frequency or do filters. And the other thing was that because these were open source, it would take quite a bit of effort to go through the documentation, figure out how to host it, set it up, and run it. So I thought to myself that if I could come up with something that was easy to use and simple to set up, that I might have a chance. Something else I did was I went on I'm in the Chicago CTO Slack group. And so I asked people, hey, does anyone else have this problem of PRs taking forever to review? And I got a pretty good response. And in fact, there's even someone in that group who had built, at his last company, built their own bot to solve this same problem. So at this point, I was still pretty skeptical that pull reminders could make any money or be a business, but I was pretty confident that it was a real problem and someone would want to use it. And I think that's the thing with ideas. If you're overly optimistic, you'll go off and build whatever idea you have and no one will want to use it. But if you're pessimistic, you won't build anything. And so I think the trick is to find the right balance and don't measure your ideas based on your emotions. So it took me 3 weeks to build the first version of pull reminders. And when I first started working on it, I wanted to build it with Elixir. For those of you who don't know, Elixir is this sort of new, fun programming language, and I was really excited to learn it. But instead, I built pull reminders with Rails, which many people, maybe not in this room, consider to be old and boring. And I did that because I thought that if pull reminders was potentially going to be a business, I didn't want to be bogged down, spending my time figuring out Elixir stuff, because I would have so many other things to worry about. So, if you're trying to build a product that you think might be a business, my recommendation would be to choose the most boring tools possible. It's easy to get tempted to, kill two birds with one stone and learn something new while you're building your product. But if it's going to become a business, you don't have time to be dealing with tech problems. And tech should be the least interesting problem in your business. This is the first version of pull reminders. It's basically what it looks like today. And it was pretty simple. You would set up configure reminders. They would post to Slack. You guys get it, right? One funny thing, I actually spent almost 5 hours deciding what emojis to use for those links. So I hope you guys appreciate them. One interesting part of building pull reminders has been figuring out how to support the different workflows on GitHub. So when I first started, I focused on what I thought was the most common workflow, which is to open a pull request and assign individual users to review your code. But as time went on, I learned that there are many different workflows on GitHub. So some people, instead of assigning users to review their code, will assign GitHub teams. And other teams don't use review requests at all. They'll use things like labels or GitHub's required review settings to make sure their pull requests get reviewed. And so what I learned is that GitHub is this huge platform with many different use cases. And so if you're trying to build a GitHub app for the masses, try to focus on the most common use cases. And in general, today, I think people are inundated with new tools and products and have really short attention spans. So when you're building your product, you want it to be something that can easily bolt on to someone's workflow and that they can start using right away. So I launched pull reminders at the end of January, and I launched with this tweet. And I launched with a tweet because I have a modest, decent Twitter following, and I secretly hoped that this tweet would go viral and get, billions of retweets, and I would get tons of customers. That didn't happen. I got a few likes, and a couple of my friends reached out, say, cool app, but no one seemed that excited about pull reminders. And at this point, I still didn't think pull reminders could be a business. And so my advice to you is, when you launch your product, don't get discouraged if you don't get a billion retweets or you get featured on Product Hunt and get like 5 votes. I think that success doesn't usually come from one tweet or one blog post. Instead, it comes from the slow, steady grind. And so yeah, instead of focusing on trying to get a bunch of retweets, find the slow, repeatable ways to grow your business. So as I just mentioned, when I launched pull reminders, no one seemed that excited about it, and I still didn't think it could make any money or be a real business. That changed when I got an email from a guy named David. So David is an engineering manager at a company called Monday.com, and when I got an email from him, I was super excited. This is the first time that a real person from a real company had expressed interest in pull reminders, and I thought, hey, this might be my first chance at a customer. So David emailed me with some feedback. He emailed me and said he loved the Slack integration, but he was wondering if it could not send reminders on weekends because it would disturb his team. So I thought to myself, easy. I'll just add a mute on weekends checkbox. Well, he got back to me and said that actually his weekends were Friday to Saturday and not Saturday to Sunday because his team is based in Israel. So I thought, okay, yeah, I got this. I'll just add a checkbox for every day, so you can pick exactly the days you want reminders. And so, I was desperate to get this first customer, so I did this right away, just two full days, and got it back to him. And he got back to me and said it was working great, but that he had one more feature request. Well, I cut this email short. It was actually like 5 feature requests. And while I was really excited to go back and forth with David, get his feedback on my product, I also started to get anxious. I was worried that I was doing all this for free, and I wanted to get paid. So I decided to ask the question. I popped the question and asked David if he'd be willing to pay $15 a month for pull reminders. And this is just a completely arbitrary number. It seemed high enough to be meaningful, but low enough that he probably won't say no. And he got back to me and said that they were definitely willing to pay for something that gave them value. And I remember being really confused by this because I wasn't sure if he meant yes, pull reminders was giving him value, or no, it wasn't giving him enough value and he wouldn't pay. Anyways, David said that he was still testing it out and that he was going to actually show it to management once he was ready. And so, yeah, whatever. We kept going back and forth for a couple weeks, back and forth, back and forth. He would send me feature requests and I would just go do them. And I still hadn't gotten paid. So I got really anxious, and a couple weeks later, I popped the question again. And this time, I asked him if he'd be willing to pay $20 a month to use pull reminders. I don't know why I raised the price $5. I think I was just feeling resentful and wanted to get paid. Anyways, he got back to me and said that he was willing to pay and had tried to add a credit card but couldn't. And in fact, at this point, I didn't even have a payment page. So I built one that day and was able to get my first customer. So all in all, this process took 3 weeks, 45 emails back and forth, 67 commits, and at the end of it, I'd made $20. This was probably the hardest earned $20 of my life, but also one of the most satisfying. I think for creative people, the feeling of coming up with an idea, building it from scratch, and getting someone to pay for it and validate the value of what you've built is one of the best feelings in the world. And just as importantly, this is the first time that I thought that pull reminders could be a business. And so, when you launch your product and you're trying to get that first customer, my advice is make sure you talk to your early users. And some people might disagree with this, but I think you should pretty much do whatever they ask for, even if that takes you in unexpected directions or things that you don't like. Chances are what they're going to do is take your half-baked idea and turn it into something that really delivers value. So I'd gotten a couple customers, and I figured I was going to get some more, hopefully. And so I decided I needed to come up with some real pricing instead of just quoting people arbitrary numbers based on how I was feeling. And so I knew that pull reminders was going to be priced based on the number of users on the team, but I didn't know how much to charge. And I was not feeling so confident at this point still, and wanted something that would be hard to say no to. So I asked myself, what's something else that developers and engineering teams are willing to pay for productivity? And what came to mind was coffee. So I spent a lot of time thinking about positioning pull reminders against coffee. I even thought about putting the slogan on my website, productivity for less than a cup of coffee. And I guess it depends where you're buying your coffee. This was based on the Chicago price of coffee. So based on that, I came up with a rate of $2 per user per month. This is my pricing. So you'll see that actually I don't do a flat rate, and instead I have pricing plans. And the reason I do that is so I can make more money. So for example, if a team is 9 developers, instead of paying me a flat rate of 9 times 2, $18 a month, they have to upgrade to the 25 developer a month plan, so I make $49 a month. And this is actually tricky. Sometimes I actually get users who email me and they're on the fence because that jump from 14 to 49 seems steep. So once in a while I'll give someone a discount and give them sort of an in-between plan. You'll also see that the 75 developer a month plan is not $2 per user per month. It's actually less. And again, I don't have some fancy reason for this. It's just that I had trouble getting people to pay more, and so I decided to settle a little bit and bring that price down. I give pull reminders away for free to open source projects, but I want to highlight the terms non-commercial. When I first launched pull reminders, I started getting these big open source based companies like Cloud Foundry and Sensu, and they were signing up for pull reminders for free. And so I decided to add the term non-commercial so that pull reminders would only be free for independent open source projects and not big tech companies that have an open source business model. In general, I think pricing is difficult. You just got to try different things and see what sticks. For me, my strategy has been to just price as much as I possibly can right up until the point where people are saying no. And that's actually led me to raise prices a few times. So once I started getting some customers, I started running into some different kinds of problems. And one was dealing with feature requests. So my inbox was just piling up. People would email me with this and that. And I also was dealing with the problem of figuring out how to announce new features and share updates with people to get them excited and get them to pay me. And one other interesting problem was that I would get, my customers are developers, they're smart people, and I always had feedback. And so I would get different users emailing me, talking about the same problems, but they had different ideas for how I should solve it. And my brain would just kind of explode because I wouldn't know, how to reconcile these different ideas and pick the best solution forward. So I tried this. What I did is I created this public backlog using GitHub projects. And so this is public. If you go to the pull reminders org, you can check it out, submit issues. And I designed it like a pretty traditional Kanban board. So it has a to-do, in progress, and done. And when I created this, I wasn't sure what was going to happen, so I just started using it to track my own work. So whatever I was working on, I would put in this backlog, and I would share it with customers over email. Today, this board has around 80 issues, I think, and every 1 to 2 weeks, I get a user-submitted issue. And this is what that looks like. So you guys are all familiar with this, but a customer will submit an issue, and then I'll tag it, and then prioritize it in the backlog. And like I mentioned, it's not just user-submitted issues. I often create my own issues based on the conversations I'm having with users over email or support. And that one challenge I mentioned earlier, where different users would give me opinions on the same things but with different solutions, this is one thing that having an open backlog has really helped with. So when I get a suggestion from a customer, or if I have my own idea, I'll actually ping a lot of my users on GitHub to get their input. And this is an example of that. And so what's interesting about this, I think, is it's sort of like an open source model for product development, even though pull reminders is closed source. And this has ended up working really well for tracking ideas, sharing updates, and helping me get input from users. So I'd gotten a couple customers at this point, and I was really eager to get more. I wanted to quit my contract work and go full-time on pull reminders. And a lot of startup frameworks out there, they focus on coming up with business ideas and validating your problem and things of that nature. But for me and for a lot of other independent entrepreneurs I talk to, the hardest part of building a business is actually reaching your target audience so you can make money. You can have the best product in the world with great messaging, but if you can't actually get in front of people, you're not going to make any money. And so while I was working on building pull reminders, I was reading the GitHub documentation, and I heard about this thing called GitHub Marketplace. Raise your hand if you've heard of GitHub Marketplace. Yeah, this is a GitHub conference, so good. For me, I had been working with GitHub for 7 years, and I never heard of GitHub Marketplace. And so when I saw this, I was like, amazing. This could solve my problem of reaching my target audience. So for those of you who aren't familiar with GitHub Marketplace, there's actually a link in the very main menu of github.com called Marketplace. And GitHub Marketplace is a directory of third-party apps, and GitHub approves these apps, and once an app is listed, people are able to purchase them through GitHub in exchange for GitHub taking a 25% cut of your revenue. And so I thought this looked like a great opportunity, and I decided to apply. And I remember when I applied, I was super nervous. Pull reminders was still kind of this sort of a side project, a couple customers, and the first step in the process was I got an email from a guy named Steve who works at GitHub. He's a partner engineer. And I remember when I got this email, I was terrified. Felt like a job interview. I worried, what if Steve was mean? What if he didn't like pull reminders? What if he told me I would never be allowed in the marketplace? Anyways, this is Steve. And when we hopped on our call, my fears went away. Steve was super nice, relaxed about the whole process, charming English accent. And he outlined the process for me, and over the course of the next couple of weeks, he helped me get ready to be listed and reviewed my app, gave me lots of great feedback. This is pull reminders went live on the GitHub Marketplace April 3rd, and this is what the listing looks like and what it looked like, still the same. And once again, I tried to launch with a tweet. Again, secretly hoping that I would get tons of retweets and go viral, and that didn't happen again. This time I did make some money, though, I think. And the best part of launching on the GitHub Marketplace wasn't the fact that I actually got listed. It was the support I got from people who worked at GitHub. So all these people are GitHub employees. You've heard Kyle speak, and I'm going to tell a little story about Brandon, but he's actually the guy who built the official GitHub Slack integration. And that's just some of the people I got support from. These are a bunch of other people at GitHub that I've personally interacted with and have supported me along the way. And see, I work alone, and sometimes working on pull reminders feels kind of small. It's just kind of a silly app. And so having these interactions with people at GitHub and getting their support has made me feel like I'm part of GitHub's mission. And this makes me feel like I'm working on something larger than myself, and that's been really meaningful. So funny story about Brandon, who's here in the audience today. About a week before I went live on the GitHub Marketplace, I woke up one morning, went on Twitter, and heard that GitHub had just launched their own new integration for Slack. And I remember my heart just sank. I figured I was toast. I figured that GitHub had just built the exact same thing as me, and I just wasted all my time, and pull reminders would be irrelevant. So I went online right away, installed it, and at least for the time being, it looked like I was safe. There wasn't any overlap in the features, and So I was reading about this new integration. It launched on Product Hunt and got tons of upvotes, and people on Product Hunt kept talking about this guy, Brandon. They said, Brandon, this guy's awesome, and beekeepers, and so I was like, who's Brandon? So this is Brandon, and it turned out Brandon lived in Chicago, where I also was at the time, and I decided to reach out. I figured maybe if Brandon liked me, he wouldn't crush pull reminders, he would spare me from GitHub's wrath, and if nothing else, I figured he could give me some advice on how to be successful on the GitHub Marketplace. Again, I was really nervous to meet Brandon. I felt like a job interview. Well, Brandon was also super nice, super warm, and after talking for a while, after a couple drinks, he actually asked me directly if I had been scared when I had heard about his new integration. And I said yes, I was scared. He laughed at me and said, you have nothing to worry about. There's nothing on the roadmap like pull reminders, and this is a really special moment for me. I think whenever you build something on the third-party platform, you have legitimate fears that that platform might kick you off or directly start competing with you. And so for me, all these interactions with people at GitHub have made it clear to me that GitHub is really invested in their ecosystem strategy, and that, at least for the time being, my business is secure. So this is the chart of the growth of pull reminders. I love looking at this chart. And so you'll see at the beginning of March, I had just a couple customers, and as of the end of last month, end of September, I had over 200 paying customers. July is when I was able to cover my bills and go full-time on pull reminders, so this was obviously a big milestone for me. And on this chart, I don't just show paid accounts, I actually show the total number of installations. And like I mentioned earlier, that's because I give away pull reminders for open source projects and also some nonprofits and student organizations. So I work alone, by myself, which is a bit weird sometimes, but overall I love it. And the reason I love it is, one of the main reasons that I wanted to start my own business was to have a lot of freedom. And in the past, I've tried building projects with people, co-founders, and what I found was that even though I was technically working for myself, I didn't feel free. My co-founder would be like, hey, if I wanted to take a day off, my co-founder would be like, hey, we got to hustle, we got to work, and so I wouldn't be able to take a day off. So working by myself now, I truly am my own boss, and I love it because I can go about my work the way I want, and I have complete creative autonomy over my product. This is a little quote by a guy, Derek Sivers. If you haven't heard of him, he's a programmer, sold a company to Apple in the 90s, and this is actually in his bio. So he talks about working alone, and it really resonates with me. For me, working on pull reminders is this very personal, creative pursuit. So working alone is pretty fun, but one of the downsides is I have to do everything, and including things that I'm not comfortable with and things I don't want to deal with. And so one of those challenges for me has been figuring out how to support GitHub Enterprise. So we are at a GitHub conference, but if you're not familiar with GitHub Enterprise, it's GitHub's self-hosted version of GitHub that usually large companies are able to download and run on their own infrastructure within their corporate networks. So for me, this is something I put off for a long time. It seemed really hard, and I wasn't good at this type of stuff. And a few months ago, a guy actually who worked at PayPal had reached out to me and said, hey, does pull reminders work with GitHub Enterprise? I told him no, not yet, maybe soon, but he kept following up with me every 3 weeks, asking, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? So eventually, I decided I had to give in. And the process of delivering on-premises software, I'd never done this, so it was completely new to me. It's very different than delivering a hosted piece of software. I had to rethink everything from, how to track errors on the customer's infrastructure to how to deal with things like licensing and billing and making pull reminders easy to set up. So, like I just mentioned, in order for a customer to use pull reminders, they had to be able to download pull reminders and set it up on their infrastructure and run it easily. A lot of the times with potential customers for GitHub Enterprise, I'm not talking to like the CTO of a huge company. I'm actually just talking to an engineer. And so I knew that for them to be able to adopt pull reminders, I would have to make the setup process really easy and quick for them to set up. I'm a Rails developer, and I hate DevOps stuff. Anytime anything DevOps has ever come up in my career, I've just hid or run in the opposite direction. And probably before this, the hardest thing I'd ever done was set up a Docker file, and 95% of that was just copying and pasting. So long story short, the solution I came up with was to use Docker. And I chose Docker because it seemed like the lowest common denominator, something that could work regardless of the type of host or machine that a customer was interested in. And the other thing I did, which some of you might be offended by, was I stuffed my entire application, except for Postgres, in one Docker image. So, pull reminders is a Rails app, but it has a worker process, dependencies like Redis, and I wanted to avoid dealing with anything like Kubernetes or anything like that. So another tricky problem was licensing. I looked at how other on-premises software does licensing, and a lot of them, you download the software, and then there's this actual activation step where you enter in a key and then are able to proceed. This looked really tricky to do, and I was trying to be efficient, aka lazy, and I didn't want to deal with this. And so what I ended up doing was really not doing anything at all for licensing, and today I just agree on licensing in a contract with the customer, and it's an honor system where I just expect them to adhere to it. I also made some pretty embarrassing mistakes figuring out how to support GitHub Enterprise, mostly out of efficiency, aka laziness. One of the mistakes I made is I never actually downloaded and ran GitHub Enterprise myself to test against it. I think this is kind of like trying to drive across the country using just Tesla Autopilot. I wouldn't recommend this. And so instead of actually testing it myself, I decided to use my first customer as my guinea pig. And this was painful for him, mostly. And so it took a couple weeks going back and forth to iron out all the kinks. And one of the problems as a result of this was that I didn't realize that there were multiple versions of GitHub Enterprise. And it turns out that these different versions have pretty different APIs. And so when I was getting my first customer, trying to get him set up, we kept running into these errors I'd never seen before. And it turned out it was due to the fact that they were running GitHub Enterprise version 2.12, and there were some big API differences. So I made some code changes, and we were able to get set up. But overall, it's a pretty painful experience for this first customer. Sorry, Ashish. Despite these difficulties, I am happy to say that pull reminders has been working well with GitHub Enterprise. So as of today, I've done 5 successful implementations, and they've gone pretty smoothly. So another challenge of working by myself is staying positive. I don't have a partner or someone to emotionally support me when things get difficult or I have to deal with things like GitHub Enterprise. And so for me, if someone signs up for a free trial of pull reminders and then decides not to purchase a subscription, things like that can sort of send me in a dark funk, and I get down for a couple of days. Today, I try to stay really focused on maintaining a positive disposition. And I think if you're thinking about working alone, this is really important to being successful. So, be mindful of your disposition, and if you have a tendency to get negative, like I do, really try to actively address it. One last funny story about working alone. So at the beginning of the year, I had planned on going on a backpacking trip with my dad and brother in the Grand Tetons. So this is going to be a week-long backpacking trip with no internet, no cell signal. And this was last month. Closer and closer to the trip, I started getting really stressed out because I was worried that pull reminders might go down while I was backpacking and that I wouldn't be around to bring it back up. And in fact, there's been a couple times in the last few months where pull reminders has gone down, and it's only come back up because I've gotten an alert on my phone and been able to hop on my laptop and fix it. So I looked into how I could try to deal with this, and I looked up the cell coverage maps for the Grand Tetons, and that wasn't going to work. I even considered actually lugging my backpack with me while backpacking. And I thought about trying to hire someone, but I didn't really have the money. So what I did is 2 nights before the trip, I frantically emailed my friend, who's a developer and lives in Japan, and told them, hey, I just added you to my monitoring, and if pull reminders goes down, check the website, and if it's down, just run Heroku restart over and over again until the site comes back up. Anyways, the trip ended up going smoothly. Pull reminders didn't go down. And so if any of you are looking for a business idea, consider a support service for people like me who need to take a vacation. And my advice would be, if you're backpacking somewhere with grizzly bears, and if you see a bear that doesn't see you, don't start screaming like I did. It won't be good. So I hope you've enjoyed my story and that it's been helpful. And I hope you've seen that building a business is actually a lot like building software. If you break it up into these small pieces, it's quite manageable and actually fun. So I'm sure a lot of you have ideas for things you want to build, and I know I have a lot more stuff I want to build on GitHub. So if you want to build stuff together, get in touch. Thank you for coming today and listening to my talk.